If you would go ahead and be turning to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13, we're going to be continuing our study in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 13 here in just a moment. We'll quickly review the earlier part of the book and our main theme. We'll go through our chapter content. We don't have a full chapter left tonight at the end of 13, so we'll go through all of those tonight. As I said, we're not going to do that every time. We're starting to add enough chapters now that it takes quite a while to get through all of them. But we'll go ahead and do that tonight since we're most of the way through 13 already. And then we'll finish up chapter 13 here. Tonight. As we talk about the Gospel of Matthew, the theme, as we've said, is about Jesus being the Messiah of the Old Testament. Matthew's writing to a largely Jewish audience, and so his argument is from the Old Testament that Jesus fulfills the prophecies concerning the Messiah. The outline we're following is Faith Life Study Bible's outline, which is the prelude to Jesus' ministry in 1:1 to 4:16, Jesus' ministry in Galilee in 4:17 to 16:20, and Jesus in Jerusalem 16:21 to 28:20. We've also been showing the chronology of the life of Christ, and as we've said, we're still in this third period, the Great Galilean ministry. That's a large part of Christ's earthly ministry. Let's go through our chapter content quickly here this evening. What is chapter 1 about? Genealogy and birth of the Messiah. Chapter 2, Messiah as a child. Chapter 3, the forerunner of the Messiah. Chapter 4, Messiah's temptation and early ministry. Now we'll get 3 for 1. What's 5 through 7 about? Messiah preaches the Sermon on the Mount. Chapter 8, Messiah performs miracles. So chapter 9, more miracles. Chapter 10, the calling of the 12 apostles and the limited commission. Chapter 11, so the messengers from John to the Messiah. Chapter 12, the Pharisees find fault with the Messiah. We're in chapter 13. We started this on Sunday morning. The Messiah tells many parables. Now again, as we mentioned, this is far from the only chapter in Matthew or in any of the Gospels with parables. There are parallel accounts to these parables in some of the other Gospels. There are other parables throughout the Gospel of Matthew, but this chapter has a great number of them. We've also mentioned this about Matthew versus like Luke's writing. Luke, while a doctor, was also a historian, and so he's tried to write everything as best he could in order, chronological order. So if you get a harmony of the Gospels, you will start oftentimes in either Mark or Luke at the beginning, and you'll follow the flow of those two. They follow a very similar flow. And so you might in Matthew do more jumping around. Matthew at times, as we mentioned, seems to be grouping things together more by category. So chapter 13, again, there wasn't chapters back then, and verses, but this whole section in the middle of the Gospel of Matthew is largely dealing with parables. Chapters 8 and 9, while Jesus performed a lot of miracles, a great number of them are in chapters 8 and 9. And so this whole chapter is dealing with parables. There's the purpose of parables in 10 to 17 and 34 and 35. The parables Jesus told in 1 to 9 and 18 to 52. And then his rejection at Nazareth at the end of the chapter. Key verses, verses 34 and 35. All these things Jesus spoke to the multitude in parables, and without a parable he did not speak to them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things kept secret from the foundation of the world. We'll go back over this. Question 3, Old Testament passages quoted or referenced. Verses 14 and 15, quote from Isaiah 6, 9, and 10. And verse 35 quotes from Psalm 78:2, that key verse we had a moment ago. I'll open my mouth in a parable, I will utter dark sayings of old. Now, as we mentioned on Sunday morning, we do have this outlined a little bit different than I normally would. In my Bible, I have it points 1 and 2 flipped. It would look more awkward in my Bible, outlined this way, but we outlined it this way for this reason. Jesus tells his first parable in 1 to 9, and then after he tells it, what does he ask in verse 10? Go to verse 10. The disciples said, "Why do you speak in parables?" So he explains it to them in 10 to 17. 34 and 35 also provides a little bit of insight into that. But then beginning at verse 18 and going through all the way down to verse 52, we have a number of other parables being told, or he goes back and explains the parable of the sower. So we put this first to get the purpose of parables. It's dealt with early on in the chapter, and then we'll go back and get those parables later on. As we mentioned, we already dealt with this on Sunday morning, but I'll quickly hit it again. Verse 11, he answered and said to them, "Because it had been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For whoever has, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because they seeing do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, Hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive. For the heart of this people have grown dull, their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For assuredly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it." In particular, Jesus' focus, as we mentioned Sunday morning, when asked about parables, verse 13, "I speak because they seeing do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand." As we mentioned when talking about these parables on Sunday morning, if those that were had an open heart and heard what Jesus was saying would listen and receive the message, they would make the application. But to those that were hard-hearted, those there that were unwilling to listen, those like the Pharisees, they would hear it, and to them it would just be some story. So again, take the parables of this chapter here, because we actually had the question later on the parables of the chapter and explaining them. And as we said, just quickly touching on each of those parables, you've got parable of the sower, about the recipient's hearts. The wheat and the tares, as well as the dragnet, you've got separation taking place. The mustard seed and the leaven, about the growth of the kingdom and the influence of it. The hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. You've got him talking about the value of being in the kingdom and coming to be in the kingdom of heaven. Then the parable of the householder seems to be, and we'll talk about this when we get there, but a harmonizing of the old and new law. So those that are open and receptive to the message will hear that and make application. But if you're the Pharisees there, he's talking this week about gardening. And then the next time he's talking about going on a treasure hunt. Or he's talking about baking bread. And they hear the parables, but they're hearing them, the same words that others are hearing, but they don't really understand it or perceive what's being said because they are closed. Their hearts are closed. Verse 34 and 35 now. The other reason he spoke in parables, not just, as we said, it revealed to those with the open heart and it concealed from those who were hard-hearted or had their hearts closed. But verse 34 and 35, all these things Jesus spoke to the multitude in parables, and without a parable he did not speak to them. Here's one of our key phrases, that it might be fulfilled. And then he quotes from Psalm 78 and in verse 2. So again, we've got two key phrases in the Gospel of Matthew. I'll come back to the other one. We've hit it a few times already. We'll hit it again. But the first one we came to in the Gospel of Matthew is that it might be fulfilled or some equivalent. This is occurrence 8 of 11 in verse 35. And so, again, Matthew writing, appealing often to the Old Testament. Jesus spoke in parables. Well, why did he do so? Well, he told part of the reason in 10 through 17. He spoke in parables. Those that would hear it, that wanted to, would understand, but others would not. But the other reason is it fulfilled Old Testament prophecy, proving him to be the Messiah. The other phrase, I'll get the first occurrence of it in the chapter real quick, is verse 11, the kingdom of heaven. That is 13 of 32 occurrences of the kingdom of heaven. If you're highlighting those in your Bible, I hope your highlighter has a lot of, if it's an ink one or a gel one, has a lot left. We're going to highlight it a lot by the time we get to the end of this chapter, if you haven't already, as this chapter, these parables are focused on the kingdom of heaven. We already touched on these first two parables. We've actually touched on the first four, but we'll touch on these quickly again. The first parable, very familiar parable, is the parable of the sower. He tells it in 1 to 9, really 3 to 9, that a sower went out to sow, and he sowed some seed that fell by the wayside. The birds came and devoured it. Some fell on the stony places, and it didn't have much earth, so it sprang up, but it had no depth. And when the sun came up, it was scorched, and it withered away because it had no root. Verse 7, some fell among the thorns. The thorns sprang up and choked them. And verse 8, some fell on the good ground, and it yielded some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30-fold. He explains that in 18 to 23 that it's different hearts. You've got those that are the wayside. That's the one that hears and doesn't understand, and it's sort of snatched away. It's as if they didn't really hear in the first place. The second, the stony ground, is those that receive it, but as soon as tribulation and persecution arise, because of the word, they stumble because they don't have true root. Those of the thorns, he points out, are those who have received it. They even have some root, but the thorns choke out the word. That thorns representing the cares and riches of this life. And then, of course, the good ground is the one that's receptive, obeys, and continues in the word. Yes.
Obviously, in this parable, the fourth one is dealt with somebody that became a Christian and brought forth the fruit of it all would have been saved. But you understand that the second and third one also. Obviously, the first one disregarded, wouldn't even let it come into their heart. We've all seen that day. But the second two, you think that's people that heard and actually were baptized into Jesus Christ, and then these distractions came along? I mean, yes. That's what my understanding has always been. That all three, the last three, were all obedient, we would say today, to the gospel. But then distractions came along. It wasn't like they heard number 2, number 3, and didn't obey at all. It seemed like they obeyed at all. Then this tribulation and persecution came along. For others, it's the deceitfulness of riches, care of this life. They people baptized into Christ, but always said that these other things overcome. You know, the focal point, is we want to see in the next parable, is the kingdom in Jesus Christ.
You're right. You know, and you're right.
Those second and third group are those, as he talks about, that they hear the word and then it chokes it out. It may be some that hear it and are at least willing to be receptive, and it's choked out before they obey. And for some, it's those that obey and it may be choked out. I think it could be some of both, but I know that they hear it and they receive it. So the fact for the stony ground, and it seems like there's a progression. So the same with the thorns. If you hear and receive it, the stony ground, there's no root, so they're not firmly planted. Then the ones who receive it among the thorns, he uses again that for. So it seems to be those that have obeyed. They've received the word, they've listened to it, but then have fallen away when those things choke it out. So again, we touched on that already on Sunday morning, so we'll go through these first few rather quickly. But that's the parable told and explained, talking about those different hearts and their reaction to the gospel message. Beginning of verse 24 now, we have the wheat and the tares. It says, another parable he put forth, saying, the kingdom of heaven. If you're highlighting that, that's 14 of 32. We're going to get all the way to number 20 by the time we end this chapter. That's 14 of 32 in verse 24, the phrase, the kingdom of heaven. Again, the kingdom may occur other times, but this exact phrase, the kingdom of heaven, occurs 32 times in Matthew in 28 chapters. This is occurrence 14. There's the man that sowed the good seed in the field, and while he slept, the enemies came and they planted these tares or these weeds among the wheat crop. And so the servants want to know, should we go out and pull up the tares now before the wheat grows? As we mentioned Sunday morning, my understanding is the tares and the wheat early on would look almost identical. You wouldn't know what you were really grabbing. You might leave the tares and grab the wheat. You might grab some of each. You probably could take some educated guess as to where you planted, but as they're mixed in, you get some of the good with the bad. So, what does the man who sowed the field, what does he tell the servants? Let it grow, and then at the harvest time, You're going to uproot the tares; they'll be disposed of, and then you uproot the wheat. As we said, some have tried to argue from this about the lack of, to be sort of tolerant and not practice discipline. Verse 37 and 38, though, he who sows the seed, the good seed, is the Son of Man, and the field is what? The world. What he's talking about is there are those who are of the kingdom, those that follow the Son of Man, and then there's those of the world. It's the only two groups there is. You're either part of the kingdom or you're not. Now, one may have joined the kingdom and fall away and leave that, but you're one or the other. That's what he's talking about. The field is the world, and so the tares are the sons of the wicked one, and then the wheat are the sons of the kingdom. And so at the end, what we've got is separation, and he's talking about, I think, final judgment. At the end, we're going to have final judgment, and those that are righteous will enter into rest, and those that are evil, those that are sons of the wicked one, those that are not sons of the kingdom are cast out where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth. Verse 42, while the others, the wheat, the sons of the kingdom, have their reward. That's the point of these. There's a separation of the wheat and the tares. He's talking really about judgment. Yes?
A couple examples that practically verify what you were saying, that it doesn't mean church discipline. Paul said, you deliver such a one to Satan. Okay. Then also, Hymenaeus and Alexander. The first one being the man in court that had his father's wife, but the second one being Hymenaeus and Alexander. He said, I delivered them to Satan that they might learn not to blaspheme. So you have to look at everything that's said about it. So obviously, there's just two practical examples of how it can't mean what some people pretend that it means.
You're right.
And again, and if memory serves correctly, I have to think back on this. If memory serves correctly, there's only two occurrences of the word church in all four gospel accounts. We talk about it afterwards for the most part. We're familiar with both of those occurrences. They're actually both in this very gospel. Chapter 16, Jesus says to Peter, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. There's the first occurrence. The second one is, if anyone sins against you, go to him, take it to him alone. If no one listens, take two or three with you. If they don't listen to them, take it to the church. Those are the two occurrences. Interesting enough, of those two occurrences, one of those two in the Gospel of Matthew has to do with what? Practicing church discipline. Right, the very point that some are trying to argue against here, where that phrase does not occur. Let's go now. We've touched on these first two again on this slide, mustard seed and the leaven, but we'll hit them again, verse 31 through 33. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, here's our key phrase again, occurrence 15, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. The other one, verse 33, the kingdom of heaven, there's occurrence 16 of 32. We're now halfway through our occurrences of our key phrase. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened. As you look at these, excuse me, as you look at these two parables that Jesus tells here in verses 31 through 33, you've got a mustard seed, a very, very tiny seed that grows into what? A tree, not just a tree, a rather large tree from a small seed. The other analogy he uses is that of leaven. We're familiar in the context of discipline in 1 Corinthians 5, where he says a little leaven, Paul says a little leaven what? Leaven's the whole lump. So you don't need a lot if you want it to rise. You just need a little leaven. So what's the point? The kingdom seemingly was going to start rather small. I think when we think to us today, if we thought about 3,000 people, obeying the gospel at once, how large a number that is, and that would be a large number, but keep in mind that happened on the day of Pentecost. That's one of the times the people are all going to be in the city. Think about all those nations represented in Acts chapter 2. Estimates are that in Jerusalem was likely 1 to 2, probably more like 1.5 to 2 million people on the day of Pentecost. That's estimates based off of some numbers from then, that there's probably close to 1.5 to 2 million people in Jerusalem at the time. So 3,000's a large number, but 3,000 is not that large of a number when you compare it to 1.5, 2 million people, it's rather small. 3,000 out of the whole world, that's a rather small number. And yet, in Acts chapter 1 and in verse 8, Jesus said, "But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem." That's where the gospel message starts, Acts 2. "In all Judea and Samaria." So it goes throughout the region around, particularly after the stoning of Stephen. Remember, that's when it really goes out into the region of Samaria, Acts chapter 8, and to the end of the earth. By the way, that's what the whole book of Acts is about. What's the book of Acts about? The early church going from Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And by the time we end the book, Paul has gone on 3 preaching journeys taking the gospel throughout. It started rather small, but over time it grew and spread. And so it may seemingly start small, but it's going to grow. Again, we said the other side of it is the influence of the kingdom may seem small, but it can be a powerful influence. Let's go to verse 44 now. These are the parables we haven't gotten to yet. Verse 44, again, the kingdom of heaven. There's occurrence 17. "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." Verse 45 and 46, these are 2 very similar ones, so we're going to group them together like we did the leaven and mustard seed. "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it." In these 2 stories, these 2 parables, rather, that Jesus tells, we've got one man that he finds a treasure. And when he finds a treasure, he goes and sells everything he has to buy the field that the treasure is in. The second man is seeking out these great pearls, or beautiful pearls, and he found one pearl of great price. And he went and sold all that he had and bought it. So, how do these 2 men in these parables view what they were trying to attain?
Today, from a practical standpoint, once you find that, everything else is incidental. It comes first. It comes first in everybody's lives. And by faith, when you think, well, I need to go do this, you preach on maybe Sunday night, 1 hour attendance and things like that. You know, you put that first, and if you seek Him first, everything else will be okay. Nothing's more important than that relationship with God.
You're right.
And that's exactly the point he's making. So again, as we talked about, Matthew's main message is that Jesus is the Messiah. Again, he's pointing from the Old Testament. That's why that it might be fulfilled occurs 11 times. He quotes a number of times from Old Testament prophecies. That's his main focus. But that key phrase, our second key phrase that actually occurs by far more, again, is that phrase, the kingdom of heaven. And as we've talked about this kingdom, going back, let's just real quickly go all the way back to chapter 3, our very first occurrence. In chapter 3, verse 1, "In those days John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea and saying, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.'" Jesus' message, chapter 4, verse 17, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Verse 23 of chapter 4 told us that Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom. By the way, what's the word gospel? Has to do with good news. So he's preaching the good news of this kingdom. Chapter 5, 6, and 7 is focused on the kingdom. We've got citizens in the kingdom in 1 to 16. Their character, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Those beatitudes, as we call them. Their influence, the salt of the earth, the light of the world. He talks for most of it about their righteousness, that It harmonizes with the Old Testament. But then he says it must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. You don't just do what they've said to you do. You've heard it said. But Jesus says, I say to you, here's how you live if you want to be part of this kingdom. Chapter 6, how it behaves in the relationship to God. Chapter 7, how it behaves in the relationship to one another. Chapter 80 tells us that everybody's going to come to this kingdom. In verse 11, and I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Jacob, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So when you stop just at chapter 8 right now, we'll get a couple more things. He's been describing throughout this kingdom. You need to repent to be in it. He's preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Here's how to live in the kingdom. It's a kingdom you're going to want to come to. It's a kingdom people are coming far and wide to be in. Now let's go to chapter 11. Chapter 11, again, kingdom of heaven and kingdom are two phrases that will occur. You'll have a couple of occurrences of them. And here one of our occurrences, the kingdom of heaven, are two of them. Jesus said in verse 11, assuredly I say to you, among those born of women, there has not one risen greater than who? Than John the Baptist. But he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he, that is John. So he says, nobody born among women is greater than John, yet the least in the kingdom is greater than John. Why? Because John was preaching about something that we'll see this when we get to the next chapter. John never got to be in. And he says, as great as John was, you get to be part of the kingdom, that's even better. Now let's go back to our text in chapter 13. We've been, as you think about this, as we study throughout this gospel account and the phrase or the term kingdom, or kingdom of heaven, when we get to chapter 13 now, and he says that this kingdom is like a treasure hidden in the field, before he ever finishes this, people that have been listening to him all this time should understand this kingdom, this treasure, it's something worth attaining. Right? The least in the kingdom is greater than John, yet among those born of women, he says, no one is greater. He said in verse 45, the same thing about the kingdom and the merchant seeing the beautiful pearl. Now, let me take a quick side note. People sometimes wonder, what's the difference between these two? These two parables, there's not really much difference. Sometimes repetition is used for the sake of emphasis. It's so valuable, it's like the man who sells all he has for the treasure. It's like the man who sells all he has for the great pearl. The biggest difference, whether this was an intended difference or not in terms of Jesus intending the message this way, the one seems to incidentally find the hidden treasure and the other is seeking out the pearl. Some are going to come to the kingdom though they may not realize what they're looking for, but when they hear the message come, and some are seeking the kingdom and come. Perhaps that's the intended difference between the two, but the ultimate point is the same. In either one, this kingdom is something of great value. Remember what Jesus says, what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world, yet lose his own soul? If we lose our soul, we're not part of this kingdom. Those in the kingdom are those that are saved. And so, he says this kingdom is of great value. Let's go to the next parable now. Verse 47 now, verse 47 through 51. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which when it was full they drew to shore. And they sat down and gathered the good in the vessels, but threw the bad away, so it shall be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separating the righteous from the just, or the wicked from the just, and cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Jesus said to them, have you understood all these things? And they said to him, yes, Lord. So again, the kingdom of heaven, verse 47, there's occurrence 19. The kingdom is like a dragnet that's cast into the sea, and it gathers of every kind. And so they take that that's good and that that's not good, and they separate them out. Again, much the same point that was made back in the wheat and the tares. There's judgment that's going to happen, and there's going to be separation. So again, you think about the separation between this one and the last one, and here's the important point. Those that have rest are those, go back now to verse 38, the field is the world, and the good seeds are the sons of what? Verse 38, they're the sons of the kingdom. This kingdom that, again, as you look throughout, just the phrase kingdom of heaven occurs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in chapter 13 alone in these parables as he's comparing it. And so when he comes, you want to be part of this kingdom because that's those that have rest, those that are just, those that are righteous. But those that are wicked, those that aren't of this kingdom, are cast out where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth. Jesus then in verse 51 asked them, do you understand these things? Perhaps because if you go back, remember the first 2 parables he told, and then later on in the text he explained, but in both instances, notice something. He explained the sower the first time, but the second time they came and they wanted to know, explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. Jesus tells the message, and he explained the first one. Then he tells the second one, and it seems they don't understand it, so they say, will you tell us what it means? So Jesus finishes these much shorter parables and says, do you understand? And they say they do. Now, verse 52. You'll find some who call this a parable, and you'll find some that don't. If you look at your headings, again, headings, they're added by men, just like chapter and verse divisions are added by men. You probably don't have a heading for a parable of a householder or any kind of parable. Some call it the new and the old, new and old treasures. ESV does in their heading. New King James has it grouped under the same heading as the dragnet. But he says, therefore, every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder. So go back to the parables that Jesus has been telling, as he's been telling them, particularly focusing beginning on the wheat and the tares. The kingdom of heaven is like a man. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant. The kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. He uses that, comparing it is like something else when he's shifting between parables. So when he says the kingdom of heaven is like a householder, it seems to be that verse 52 is just a really short parable. Question is, what is this? He said, every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out of his treasure things new and old. So you got a householder, he's got some old things and some new things, and he brings those out together. Where most tend to fall on the meaning of this, there's some division, some question over it, but the most likely explanation, and I think it harmonizes with Matthew's teaching in particular, is the every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom is the one that brings out the old and the new together. That is, we've got the old law and then what Jesus is teaching, and they're able to take and harmonize those together. Jesus is fulfilling the old law, those prophecies concerning him. That seems to be the point here, that they're able to harmonize those together. Let's go to verse 53 now and finish chapter 13 here this evening. Verse 53. Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished these parables that he departed from there. When he had come to his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, where did this man get his wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get all these things? So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and in his own house. Now he did many mighty works there because he did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. So Jesus comes to Nazareth. He speaks in the synagogue. And if you can imagine, everybody sitting there and they're listening and they're just astonished at him as he's speaking to them. And then if you can imagine, one turns to the other and goes, wait a minute. Isn't that the carpenter's son? What makes him think that he can tell us all these things? And his mother Mary? Don't we know his brothers? What makes him think he can tell these things? And now they went from being astonished at the beginning to at the end it says they were offended at him. It almost seems like they're listening and so astonished at how knowledgeable he is, and then they go, wait a minute, he's from here. Wait a minute, we know him. What makes him think he's better than us? I don't know what all was said in the synagogue. In Matthew's account tells us he spoke to them. But whatever was said, now that they realize who's saying it, they take offense to it. And so verse 58, Jesus did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. I think you take this and harmonize this with what Jesus told his disciples when they were going out and preaching in a city, and if the city rejects it, you dust off your feet. Jesus realizes even though this is his home city, this is where he grew up here in Nazareth, they're not going to listen. There's no need to spend all this time doing mighty deeds in Nazareth because they're hard-hearted. They're the seed that the birds just snatch it away from, or the soil the birds snatch it away from. They're not going to receive it. In fact, at this point, not even his brothers are listening to what he has to say. Now, again, later on they do. 4 brothers are mentioned here: James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. James we're most familiar with. He's mentioned in Galatians chapter 2. He's mentioned in Acts 15, standing up on the day of Pentecost. He is the writer, most likely, evidence suggests, that he's the writer of the epistle of James. And in this Judas, if you remember in the book of Jude or Judas, 2 names that would commonly be used together as being Jude or Judas. Jude, who writes the epistle of Jude, says he's the brother of James. James would have been of note among the brethren. Jude, the brother of James, or Judas, the brother of James. That would also be then Jude, the brother of Jesus. So they do kind of believe, but at this time, even they're hard-hearted and not receptive to the message. Lord willing, on Sunday morning, now we'll get ready for chapter 14. That outline is on the back table. I'll get you 15 out on Sunday morning, but 14's out on the back table. You can pick that up for Sunday morning.